This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where techniques mind, we ponder, we dream.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays over Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Cool, amazing. Yeah, I'm Dimitri. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Gradient Labs. Gradient Labs is automating complex customer support use cases end-to-end for regulated industries. So I've probably thrown in a bunch of keywords there. Let me actually double click and explain what it
I'm
actually
like, wait
means.
a minute. Let's
Yeah,
get into that a
exactly.
little bit.
So end-to-end, first of all, we are essentially an AI agents company. We're producing AI agents that help customers to automate customer support. But we're not aiming at Copilot applications as sort of one category of things, but rather complete end-to-end automation of processes and customer conversations.
Mhm.
So really combined with the focus on regulated industries, what it means for us in particular is that we have an incredibly high bar on quality that we need to deliver in order for companies like banks or any types of payments company to kind of accept even the premise of there's a thing that will automate and handle conversations completely end to end without
Right.
a human approving every message, right? So, but that's kind of what we are essentially doing. We're automating customer support for financial institutions end to end without any kind of human in the loop application.
So are you aiming to completely replace a typical customer support person, or is it an augmentation of the customer support function?
No, it's replacement of a part of it, I guess, but
Okay.
it's not augmentation.
So when you say a part of it, is it like which part of it have you explained? So for example, maybe you could do a real life example of
Example.
how it would
Yeah.
work. So I'm at the at a website or on my app, and I'm trying to contact Wells Fargo for a particular topic. What would happen?
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to work with them, so they would have an integration with us. And whenever you contact them, they would route this message to us and essentially say, hey, what should we reply to Chris?
Mm,
And we would have at the same time access to your details, or depending on the setup. But let's imagine we have an integrated setup where we actually have access to your details.
right.
Then
Ideally,
we'd be able,
that's what you want is the
yes,
full
yes,
detail. Yeah.
absolutely. So, and then we can answer pretty complex stuff already. But out of the box, let's say when you launch with us, you don't have any backend or data integrations yet. Typically, we can already resolve 40% of all the questions that financial
Mm,
institutions have from their customers. It might be questions like, I can't log in, I see a pending transaction, like for whatever reason. Lots of those questions you can actually answer without actually seeing your data because the answers are quite similar. The same,
right.
you
It's
like
pretty
pay with your
generic.
credit.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I don't know, you pay at the hotel, there's a hold or fee or like authorization, and then you're like, oh, but I thought it will be more or less, why it's that. And so they're easily explainable even without looking at your data.
And then at some point, do you actually get to like so let's say the AI has a conversation with you. You talking to the AI. I know in previous iterations people were talking about problems with AI because of going off the rails and hallucinations and things like that. How do you deal with stuff like that? I mean, what if I start asking it questions like philosophical questions or political
Yeah.
questions or stuff like that? How
Yeah.
does it keep the topic?
Yeah. I mean, that's the core of what we're promising, right? Because we're working with financial institutions primarily. That's kind of, if we can't solve this, then we don't have a product to start with. So we solved that problem, obviously. And there are mechanisms, there are good mechanisms to do that well. They're like guardrail mechanisms. Also, in our case, in order to produce one response to you as an end customer, there are actually 10 to 15 LLM calls in between. So you
Mm,
never really talk to, I don't know, ChatGPT, OpenAI, or Anthropic's model. It's a fairly complex system where there's like a chain of different LLM calls. There's like a decomposition of different things. And so really because you never talk to the LLM directly, it's actually quite hard to prompt inject or let it do something that you think it could do. And then there are a bunch of like additional mechanisms like guardrails, where like, is that question from the user potentially an attempt to manipulate the agent type of thing, or
Right.
is that answer that the AI agent is giving is potentially financial advice? Because that's what banks would care about, right? So it's like, because they care about certain regulatory requirements as well, so they cannot give advice if they're not regulated to do that. And certainly, most certainly, they would not want our AI bot to give financial advice, which is probably the right thing to do, right? But the thing is, most AI bots actually would just, you can't prevent them from doing that, right? So
Right.
that's why they're not fit for purpose for financial institutions. They would just blurb something out, and then you could be, as an organization, be in trouble from the regulator perspective.
Oh yeah. I can't believe how much stuff that these AI bots put out that's complete
Exactly.
nonsense.
So, exactly. But we're catering exactly towards that, right? So we're essentially saying, okay, we got you covered out of the box across all those angles. Like, you can try to break it as much as you want. We have like obviously dealt with millions of conversations now, and there's not a single like really harmful case like you might have seen from the press from other companies.
Well, how do you communicate it? Like, what if a customer starts stepping into territory that the AI can't respond to? Does it automatically, does it basically reveal itself as an AI? Do you start off revealing itself as an AI, or do you punt it over to a human? What exactly
Yeah.
happens?
That's actually an interesting question. I mean, it's a bit of a gray area right now. It's a subject of debate. Like, do we actually say it's AI, or I think the new EU regulation means that you need to say it's AI. But
In the
actually,
EU, but not anywhere else.
yes, I believe so. But in terms of what we see from customers, half of them are actually give them human names. They don't pretend that it's not AI. So if you would ask it, it would say that it's AI, so it doesn't lie to you.
Yeah.
But at the surface, you can give it a human name, right? And then obviously the end customer wouldn't even know whether it's AI or human. And what we have found, an interesting insight there, companies who actually give it a human name see way better CSAT results and conversation quality. Because usually if you just say, oh, it's a virtual assistant, the first question that humans ask, like, give me a human to talk to, without well, obviously because it's like a general perception, they're pretty bad, right? So,
Yeah.
and to be honest, 99% of them are probably quite bad right now.
That's
But
interesting. Have you dug deeper into the data to find out if anybody has ever maybe not found out if it was AI or not? Because I'm assuming people have conversations with these things, like those companies that you give it a name and don't reveal that it's AI. Some customers probably interact with it thinking, "Oh, this may be a human being," or they don't even think that it's an AI. They think it's a human being, and then they go away thinking that they dealt with a human being when they didn't actually deal with a human being. Did you dig into the data to see if that's the case?
we certainly had seen lots of cases where at the end of the conversation, the agent revealed, like for whatever circumstance, maybe the human asked, somehow it was revealed that it was an AI agent. And then we have a bunch of comments like, oh my God, I would have never thought you are an AI agent. And we literally have screenshots of those. Like, for this whole conversation, I thought you were a human.
Yeah. No, it's
So it's
AI
really,
is unbelievably good now. I've been listening to
yeah,
some IVR, AI IVRs, which are so realistic. They sound so human-like. I'm like, I cannot tell the difference between. I mean, I think when I'm chatting, I can tell the difference because of the type of words that they use and things like that. But
yeah,
some of the IVRs are just insanely good now.
yeah, no, 100%. But you know what the difference is? Is that I think if you chat to ChatGPT, right? So it is pretty good. Or like you have Gemini voice assistant, something like this. It does sound pretty natural and real time and everything. But within the customer support environment, because you need to constrain it to a certain, like, to a certain area, to a certain sort of topics and pieces
Yeah.
of information, you naturally kind of restrict it in what it can say and how naturally it can behave. Because when you chat to ChatGPT, it can literally tell you anything, and it all will sound plausible because that's how it was trained, right? So that's
Right.
why, it will always sound like almost like a human because like it was trained on a bunch of that data. But actually, if you have a more controlled system, like something within the customer support space, because it needs to be controlled by policies and by types of documents and by processes. So making them sound like humans is much harder. And,
Yeah.
and because it comes at the expense of, like, if you give them too much flexibility to sound like human, they might just come up with shit.
Right, but I mean, you can
yeah.
actually say, there's certain topics you can talk about, like dogs and sports or something like that. It's like,
Yeah.
or the weather. You can say, what's the weather
Yeah.
like wherever you are. So there are
Yeah,
certain topics.
absolutely. So
Because I
that
remember,
is absolutely
this
the case. Yeah.
distinctly. I was talking to some guy, and I forget and he was probably in Malaysia
Mhm.
but he was talking about, sports teams in my area, and he had
Yeah.
an American accent, and I thought, well, this guy, I don't think he's actually here. But I mean, have you ever thought of making, like, is anybody ever asked for the AI to sound more human, in that it could do things like talk about local sports teams, or tell me about your pets or your kids or whatever, like in that kind of like
Maybe
areas,
not.
like weather.
Yeah. Maybe not in the banking space. I think if you're a lifestyle
Don't
brand,
they
I
want to
can imagine
make bankers sound more human? Come on.
yeah, well, most of all, they want to be helpful to their customers and
Right.
compliant with the regulation. I think that would open, but quite frankly, I think it would open quite a big loophole, because, like, okay, I mean, if you can constrain the area to the dogs and sport
Yeah,
teams,
dogs and
maybe it's
sports.
maybe it's a good
And
idea.
maybe the
But
weather. The weather's okay, right? You can talk
oh, the
about the
weather,
weather.
yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely,
Safe
yeah.
topics. Right.
Safe topics, yeah. Yeah.
So are you one of the founders of the company?
Yes, I'm one of the three co-founders. We have also Neil and Danai, both on the team as well. Danai is our chief scientist, and Neil's our CTO. We are all ex-Monzo people. Monzo is a digital bank in the UK, probably the biggest neobank.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, we've all been early employees there. I joined Monzo as employee number 30 around sort of Series A time, and have been leading all things data science and AI and machine learning since then. That's how we came to that topic, because
Right.
we have been automating customer support and customer operations processes
Right.
for the last 7 years, essentially, and that's how we got to found Great.
So what made you decide to leave and found the company? Like, what drove you to it?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, because I never considered myself. If you would have asked me that question a year ago before I founded the company, I was like, I'm not looking to found a company. It's not. I don't need that. I was never that person.
You
who's
wouldn't
like,
consider yourself an entrepreneur?
I would in many cases, but I can tell you in a second why. I'm too pragmatic. I'm too.
Every
too
founding
logical.
team needs one person who's pragmatic, at least one.
Well, exactly. But we are like all data scientists, machine learning engineers.
Oh yeah, so you're all pragmatic.
Yeah, I thought to be quite logical and too pragmatic. And actually, a former colleague of mine with whom I was walking to the tube station yesterday or a few days ago, he reminded me yesterday, it's like, Dimitri, do you remember 10 years ago you said we are never going to be founding businesses? And he has founded a successful business now as well, because we are too rational. And I'm like, so I still believe in that, but it was just the rational thing to do to found a business now.
Yeah. It made sense.
Yeah, but you know what? That's because kind of sometimes some businesses they kind of need a religious conviction of a certain market gap or something that some people see that only they see, and then that's why like 90% of them fail, and then maybe 10% is there's really something.
Yeah.
But now the situation is different, right? So now if you actually are a domain expert in certain areas and you understand how to solve those problems well, and now you had this huge technological unlock, which is AI.
Yes.
So it's less of a like trying to find a problem or like try to find a new take on something. It's more about taking existing problems and solving it really, really, really well.
Right.
And so I think that is a different type of founding, and that is only unlocked with kind of new technological changes. At least that's how I believe or think about it. And so essentially, because we are deep domain experts in certain areas, we know how to solve what the problem is and how to solve it really, really well. So it's kind of on the surface what needs to get done. And we feel like we're the best people to actually tackle that problem. So that's why it made rational sense to actually found a company.
So were you in the customer service space within the bank, or were you in other spaces and you saw the problem in customer service?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I was leading all things data science across the whole bank. But customer operations, customer support, and financial crime are usually typically the biggest opportunity areas for data scientists within any bank, frankly. So that's why naturally we gravitated and spent quite a lot of time on projects in that area. So we naturally became essentially experts in that area.
So there's got to be a solution to this. Now, a lot of companies,
Yeah.
I find that customer service seems to be like an afterthought. It's like this is the last place. It's the last refuge of things, and people don't. I get the sense that a lot of companies don't give it the importance that it deserves, right? And are you seeing the same thing, like in the industry as a whole across the board?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question because that's my favorite topic actually. Because when I joined Monzo, right? So like there was literally one customer support person sitting right next to me.
One
They joined
person
the same.
for the entire
Yeah.
bank.
Well, I mean, we were 30 people, right? So 30 people, and we just literally just launched the alpha or beta,
Boy,
whatever it was.
that person must have been very, very busy.
Well, to be honest, everyone was doing customer support in the early days. So it was
Right.
literally like everyone has access to intercom, and like everyone helps if
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
spike or outages and so on. So there was one person sitting right next to me, and I think really a huge driver of Monzo's success in the early days was an obsession with really, really good service to a degree where customers would write to us in a pub to the customer support agents like, hey, I'm with my buddy here in the pub, like can you reply? So they were showing off to their friends what customer support person from a bank would reply to them. Like,
Yeah, because it
imagine
was
that, right?
unheard of, right? I mean, well, you're a neobank, so you
Exactly.
had to do things differently. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Or things like somebody lost their card and were traveling to Heathrow. They needed an urgent card replacement because they're going to, I don't know, Ibiza or whatever it was. And it
Yeah.
was literally a customer support person getting on the tube, traveling to the other side of the
Wow.
town to
That's
deliver the
like a
card to the touristic
Nordstrom.
control.
That's like a Nordstrom business case study thing. You know, the whole thing with the woman
Yeah,
bringing the tires back to Nordstrom. Nordstrom's giving them a refund, even though they
yeah.
don't sell tires. So that's like
Ah,
a that's a
interesting.
great story.
Yeah, yeah. That's how important it was, right? So there was like, and from the beginning, I deeply believe that it was a big part of our success. And even now, if you compare like customer service and banking rankings, Monzo is always at the top.
Mm,
It's of course much harder to run such a personalized and such an amazing experience
yeah,
that scale because we now have probably more than 2,000, 3,000 people in that
yeah.
area. But like it's still a very crucial part. And I think with AI, what many companies do not realize yet is that you can actually now achieve higher quality results with AI agents, especially for companies who run like gigantic customer support operations. Because
Yeah.
when you run really big operations, it becomes really difficult to maintain quality because there's a very quick turnaround of people. People stay only for 1.5 years maximum. The organization is very
Oh, if
complex.
you
So
stay somewhere for a year and a half, you're an old timer
yeah,
nowadays.
exactly, exactly,
It's like
exactly.
it's
So
like
really, it's
you stay for 2 years, you're the president of the company, the way things are
yeah,
going nowadays.
well, yeah, yeah, and so really, there's like a big promise where even the large companies can now get better customer support than potentially with their existing teams.
But wouldn't it be more useful for smaller companies that have like no team or like a very, very small team to be able to act like they have a much larger team? But or is this more targeted specifically to the larger companies that already have a sizable
Yeah,
team?
I think well, we target larger company for a reason because it's actually possible to go to them and say, look, you have right, and most of them will have a CSAT, which is CSAT is customer satisfaction score, which they usually
Yep.
typically measure after every organization, and that would typically range in a range like within 50 to 60%.
Mm.
We can actually go to them and say, hey, we can actually guarantee you a CSAT of 80 to 90%.
Mm.
Let us actually demonstrate. It's harder to do with smaller companies because smaller companies typically have CSAT 80 plus
Right.
because at a smaller stage, like when Monzo was very small, it was very, very easy to have high, well, not very easy, but it was possible to have a high
Yeah.
CSAT
Because you
because
had all these
you could
all hands
hire,
on deck doing the customer
yeah,
support.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
like people like really pouring their hearts into it. But when you have a machine of 3,000 people, it's more anonymous. It's all metrics driven. Nobody really uh, gives it all or cares as much, which
Right.
is quite natural, I guess.
So how do you train the AI? Do you just have it watch somebody and or do you feed it a bunch of data or how do you get it to act like a customer service agent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. There are obviously like public documents that are available that customers have access to, but usually don't bother to read, or at
No, of
least
course not.
some of them. Yeah, yeah,
Who's got time to read all that? I mean, come on.
yeah, exactly. And honestly, if you could just ask the directed question and get the answer instantly, like why would
Yeah.
you try to look through
Yeah,
websites
I've done
and
that
find
myself
it?
with terms and conditions. I say, "Can you please read the terms and conditions and tell me this, 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 and this?" And then
Yeah,
3 seconds later, the AI gives you. Now, I don't know if any of that is true, but I kind of trust it because it's just reading a document. But
yeah.
go on. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah. So that is the first part, i.e., the kind of public knowledge base. But what we do as well, we in everything that we build, we try to mimic how a human would be onboarded into a new
Mm,
organization. So imagine you're like a new customer support agent. You join and you kind of maybe get some training. It's like, here's a manual, read those 50 pages. So
yeah.
you get kind of high level introduction of how the company works, about the processes, the product features, and so on. But really, what happens then is you maybe remember only 20% of that,
Oh, good luck,
or,
if
yeah,
even,
or
if
build
that.
some, yeah, or build some at least like high level mental model. But what happens then, essentially case by case, you just like you try to answer something and then you realize, oh, I actually don't know this bit, and you kind of ask a more senior experienced colleague. So, and to mimic that behavior, what we do, we read historical conversations from human agents, and
Mm,
we essentially try to learn as much as possible about the company. But first of all, we obviously don't struggle with the first problem, like remembering on 20% or
yeah,
needing
yeah.
to
You
learn
remember
something.
it remembers
Yeah,
100%. Although
yeah,
some
exactly.
of my
So
AI, some of my chat GPTs doesn't remember what I said earlier in the thread.
yeah,
So
I mean that's no, but we obviously remember everything. But even more importantly, because usually those public knowledge bases have only 50% of information,
right.
and then because by definition, you only write the stuff that is most relevant to most customers or like to a majority of customers. But
Yeah.
there's like a long tail of knowledge, which typically lives only in people's heads. People who have been there in the company for a longer time, they're like obscure features, obscure, like, I don't know, something. And so the other half of the knowledge essentially lives in people's head, and the way it comes out is through conversations to
Right.
humans. And because as AI, you can just read through thousands of conversations and essentially extract those bits, pieces of knowledge, and that's what we do, and that's how we kind of fill the bucket. First half was public knowledge base articles, and the second half of the bucket was kind of just reading and consuming and understanding what other humans are saying.
And then I'm assuming you can also once you've done that, I'm assuming you can also tell it what tone to have in the conversation. So like you could have like
Yeah,
a branded agent, right? Because if you have a neobank that speaks more to Gen Z as opposed to something that speaks more to older generations,
yeah.
whatever, you can change the tone of the conversation.
Yeah, you know what? Like literally, almost every company is asking me that question, and I'm not sure I have
See,
like
see.
yeah, yeah. I don't know whether I have like a super satisfying answer for this. So the way we are doing it is we copy the tone of voice of the humans.
Right.
So essentially, the way your
But what if
humans
the
interact.
customers don't like the tone of the voice of the current humans?
Well, but that's a different issue. Then
Yeah, exactly.
maybe that's what they need to change, right? So, but that's what we do as a kind of default, and that kind of works in 95% of the cases. But then actually, customers sometimes do say, "It's like, but actually, we didn't like our tone of voice. How can we create a different one?"
That's right.
And I think it's actually quite difficult to kind of to give a complete flexibility to customers to actually define that, and I
Mm,
can explain why. Because the way most companies are actually doing it, they just create 4 templates, like formal, friendly, and something pirate.
yeah,
Literally, that's the three that some companies have, right? I think ideally companies would want to kind of personalize it and kind of describe it a lot more. But the problem
sure.
is, the more you describe it, the more dangerous it becomes that it will go off the rails.
True.
Because if you say be short and concise, how do you make sure that it drops the less relevant information? Like as a
Right.
human, you have the intuition. You're like, here are the most important bits on that particular question, and I can drop the remaining 2 or 3. But for an AI, because it doesn't have a good mental model of your company, at least for now, it's actually much harder to decide, like, out of those 6 bullet points, what are the most critical ones.
Right.
And so those types of questions become then, like I said it to be concise, but now it drops irrelevant information that should be there. And then you start hitting issues like that. So that's why we don't quite let customers customize it completely, but we just say, look, we're going to talk like your humans do. So
Right.
we're going to be, for all intents and purposes, like another member on your team.
Right. Right. Very cool. Very cool. So it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2035,
Yeah.
10 years from now. Where are we going to be with this? I mean, is it going to be able to do more? Are you going to expand outside of the customer service space? Are they going to become even more lifelike? Where do you see yourself and where do you see things in 10 years in this space?
Yeah. Oh my God. 10 years in that space. I'm like,
Yeah.
I barely can keep up today. I don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. I mean, like if you think about the last 2 years, it's just staggering what happened.
Yeah.
I think I'm a big believer of this idea, and I've been pretty much promoting this idea since the beginning when we launched, like this idea of one-person unicorn that Sam Altman has popularized or gave it a really good term. I was describing it, and
That's a great term. I love that.
Yeah, in 2 sentences. When I was like trying to communicate this idea before, I was like, yeah, there will be this time where super scalable companies will exist, and he just came in as like one-person unicorn. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, that makes total sense. Anyways, I'm digressing here. So I believe actually in that, and we are a big contributor to that mission, right? But we're taking only a part of it. And so really what we have observed working in a larger company is that everything is kind of defined through SOPs, at least on the operational side.
Yeah.
On the custom operation side, that's what we are handling. And so really we have built a fairly generic capability to follow arbitrary standard operating procedures.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be chat, actually. Our interface can be also like, we can do fraud investigations and money laundering assessments by looking at the data. So it's not a kind of a chat interface. It starts with a data points. So that's the direction, future direction, but it's not pretty much 10 years. It's like 2 years or 1 to 2 years. And
yeah, so that's not that far away. Yeah,
exactly. So there's custom operations, but really it's just a tiny piece of the puzzle. I guess in 5 to 10 years, there will be something which is like almost like a business operating system that will be completely redefined.
Yeah.
Where,
well, if you want to get to that like single person unicorn vision,
exactly,
you got to have the ability to sort of take input from that single person and do all of the functions of business, including customer service and everything else. Right.
Exactly. And we had just tiny part of it, but I think somebody will build this sort of central brain or central operating system that orchestrates stuff and that kind of acts as a primary interface. But if you think about what needs to happen over sort of the next 3 to 5 years, and that's where a lot of kind of our competitors are going, well, not our competitors, but companies who are building AI agents, is that they need to be able to integrate expertise into the AI agent. So right now you can imagine like this. The AI agent is at the level of a fresh grad who receives like a 10-page document. It's like, okay, here's how you debug logging issues. Go and do it. But if you think about doing like money laundering investigations or fraud investigations, you actually would hire people who have been trained for 12 months, for 18 months to do that job. So they've been taught about different aspects of it, edge cases and so on. So this is what we typically call experience or expertise.
Yeah.
Right. So, and nobody has actually managed yet to replicate that expertise or create AI agents that kind of act on that expertise.
Yeah.
At least not that I've seen, but that's where we are going over the next 2-3 years. Is like we're essentially baking in the expertise of what, for example, money laundering is and how you investigate it and how you detect it into our AI brain. And then when we work with company, it becomes available out of the box. So like they would hire a fraud expert right now. They hire us, and the notion of fraud and how you detect it and how you detect money laundering is already embedded, so you don't need to describe it.
So you're basically creating like an AI avatar of a money laundering expert or an agent, an AI agent who is, and then that can actually learn. But how far away do you think it is where it can learn? Because I read a couple articles about this, and they're saying that that's the big impediment to these things, is that they have a lot of trouble learning because they don't.
100%.
Really learn,
I think that's, by the way, I 100% agree, and that's, I think, one of the biggest remaining blocks to make super useful, super powerful applications. I think, by the way, our application works so well for financial services is because we have figured an easier part of that learning process, because we are learning from historical conversations.
Yeah.
I could talk about this topic, I think we're out of time, for a very, very long time, but I believe that's the kind of secret sauce or magic piece that is missing in
Yeah.
most AI applications, like this ability to learn, because you don't want to just really save all the tags like what ChatGPT does.
Yeah.
You probably want to create some structured representation of that knowledge and be able to override it with one thing, right? So if I tell you, actually, Chris, my name is not Dimitri, I'm Peter, and you believe me, then you would override it and you would remember it. Or you say, oh, he's clearly joking, so you wouldn't kind of discard it completely and forget about
exactly.
it. But and that's the problem to be solved there, right? So it's not just copying text into a document and that's your memory.
Yeah.
It's actually like what you memorize and how you memorize, how you build out a mental model, which could be a knowledge graph underneath, that has a lot of reasoning and processing underneath it. And I think that's what needs to be figured out. 100%.
See, it almost makes me think I have this feeling that the path that we're on, I mean, everyone thinks it's a path to AGI, but I think there's all these roadblocks in the way that we still haven't fully figured out. And I think that one is a huge one, because once we figure that
100%.
out, then it's really broken down a lot of barriers. But that's a really big barrier that we need to hit, that we need to get through.
100%. Yeah, for us, for example, like with GPT-4, we already had enough reasoning power to actually power our use case.
Sure.
So really, most of the time that we have built, like, yes, we have seen some improvements from the further models, from some steps that made our processing faster, better, more accurate. But really, those were not breakthrough. Like, they can reason at PhD level quality, right? Or PhD task, but it doesn't matter for customer support. Customer support is much easier, and yet it's so hard to solve.
Exactly.
And that's why, like, I completely agree with you. Like, that learning bit is actually what's missing.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get to that soon, because there's just so many barriers and we're working on them really hard. So that's good. So
100%.
this has been great. Thank you so much. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
What's the best way? Well, Dimitri Mason on LinkedIn, probably the best way to reach me. I'm every day there. So I'm a LinkedIn person now. I'm selling stuff. So I guess that's how it goes.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely put that in the show notes so people can go directly to your website. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Talk to you later. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.